Any given September, the stone industry meets in Verona, Italy for Marmomac, the world's largest trade event for the marble and stone supply chain. From quarries to processed products, technologies and machinery to tools and more, Marmomac 2024 is set to be another great success, with 1,507 exhibitors, 12 halls and 7 outdoor areas, 76,000 square meters of floor space, and 51,000 visitors, with 66% of those being international visitors from 54 countries. Visit www.marmomac.com to learn more about Marmomac. See you in Verona, Italy from September 24th to 27th, 2024. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey, and with me today I have
Bill Black from the Calgary Construction Association, President and CEO.
And we're talking today about the Green Line in Calgary, which I think it's fair to say is something of a saga, especially from the construction point of view. So to start us off, Bill, could you kind of explain where the construction industry came into this, I think, long planned out and sort of I think it's fair to say, troubled project?
No, for sure. The Green Line project, is probably at least 10 years old in its current iterated form. And as such, a complex project, the largest value project in Calgary's history from a municipality perspective, and then technically challenged with various issues related to scope. How do you traverse a river? How do you tunnel in a downtown geology that is less than ideal for tunneling? Which parts of Calgary do you connect? Do you go to the south? Do you go to the north? And of course, most recently, there's talk of going to the airport. And, that's a separate issue. But the project started with a very ambitious scope and has shrunk fairly progressively since, as budget constraints were recognized and such. And so the industry has followed. It's been on again, it's been off again. The industry, the industry has been engaged and then it wasn't. And then there was a foreign consortium got involved out of the US, etc. And now kind of fast forward through various ups and downs that are quite fatiguing. If I was to go into detail, we'd all be asleep. And it loses a lot in the telling, but the reality is most recently we've seen just last week the province pooling their funding portion as a way to put the brakes on the project.
Now, regardless of all the political stuff that we'll get into in a bit, this was addressing a need because Calgary, I think it's one of the biggest expanding cities. It's I guess the best way to put it is it's the biggest city that's expanding a lot in this country, essentially. And so this was part of that.
Yeah, the growth of Calgary, over the last few years, we're sitting at about 1.65 million. The trajectory sees us hitting 2 million in a relatively short period of time. And, based on the kind of way Calgary has evolved, we have a extensive downtown hub where most of the office towers and traditional office jobs have resided. And then Calgary expands out in all four directions in a residential manner. And so you've got growing bedroom communities that are further and further away from the work communities, from the retail communities. And now with our event center project underway, also further away from our entertainment district.
And so just in terms of, well, not to get, like you said, this is fatigue everybody, but maybe some like edited highlights as to where construction was kind of left went with these various twists and turns. It sounds like uncertainty was kind of the watchword here for you guys.
Yes, there was a fair degree of uncertainty. And for instance, 5 years ago, it was still a whiteboard imagined project. So industry was following its progress, knowing that at some point an opportunity for actual work would materialize. And, we had engaged in the conversation about, breaking it up so local contractors can participate in the project. Don't bundle it or don't create a risk profile that only foreign entities can do. As you would expect from our association and our industry, we wanted to champion the idea of built by Calgarians for Calgarians as much as possible. For a period of time, it did head the high risk profile, non-Canadian entity involvement. And then more recently, it started to swing back again. And probably the least scope version of it was announced a month or so ago. And industry was beginning to gear up. Some entities were very close to actually starting work. Maybe contracts weren't signed yet, but intent was clear. I've been speaking to some members who had already begun to shuffle resources so that they would be available when shovels hit the ground. And so we were closer than we've ever been in a decade. And of course, that being the case, when the province pooled their funding last week, it came as a rather abrupt move at a very primed to start period in the history of the project.
What does this do in terms of like nervousness, I guess, for lack of a better term, amongst the industry, where, and not just the provincial government, any government that they're dealing with? How do they know this? The money's just not going to go away, and then they're left having prepared, not holding the bag, but holding a prep bag, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Well, I think some folks thought we maybe over-dramatized the scenario, but we felt we needed to voice our concern that there's a precedent here that large amounts of funding can just be pooled. And we were questioned as to why did you sound so alarmist? And, the reality is it was sudden, and the reasons given for pooling the funding, whilst they may have legitimate questions, the reality to us is the questions they said were the reason for pooling their funding have been there for a long time. They're not new questions. The reduced scope was announced over a month ago. And so why wait that long to express your displeasure? The tunnel has been there since day one. So why now express your concern about the tunnel? That was really the precedent we were worried about, that despite the same questions having been there all along, you picked a very late in the game time to pool your funding. And that does, when you consider that the province is the largest procurer of construction in Alberta, they build the hospitals and the schools and the roads and everything else. And so provincial funding is a major factor in what our industry engages in. It sets a little bit of a worrisome precedent.
And there was an earlier precedent where the Kenney administration or government did similar, where they decided they were going to, or actually you were closer to the ground than I was. You tell me what they did that sort of, and then that kind of got rectified, and then we're back where we started, it seems like to me.
Yeah, there was a provincial intervention, so to speak, that requested some more due diligence. And, it did create a delay whilst that was undertaken. And then you don't just turn a switch on and off on a project like this. If you create a delay, there's a lag time afterwards before things get back online, so to speak. But it was, no delay is convenient. However, a funding partner is entitled to have questions.
Right.
They have a responsibility. It is Alberta taxpayer money, and they're a 1/3 funding partner. So there was a delay, and of course, when you politicize that issue, there's lots of finger pointing that that delay was solely to blame or largely to blame for the problems we still have. It was a factor, but it was by no means the only factor in the scenario, and it's just unfortunate. It's totally expected that these things get politicized, but it's always unfortunate when they do, because the reality is the project generally suffers, and the ultimate customers, being Calgarians in this case, the ultimate it's the Calgarians. The analogy I used, it's like the parents are going through a divorce and the kids are the collateral damage. It's just an unfortunate dynamic that plays out. And then, of course, the industry sitting there having been primed for work. Some entities more so than others, some of them have even incurred cost in getting ready to perform on the project. And now they're left hanging going, is this going to happen? Is this going to go away? Is it going to go on the back burner for what could easily be 2 years? A 2-year delay is nothing when you put the brakes on. The other scary thing is, October is generally budgeting season for most companies. And so most of these organizations are going into budgeting season within the next month or so. And when you're budgeting for next year, your revenue projections are part of what drives your budget prioritization. Where are you going to fund? What are you going to stop funding? What are you going to start funding? What are you going to keep funding? And so you hang a big question mark over something this large. And right before budgeting season, industry may respond to the worst case scenario. And so even if everybody turns around in February and says, we're ready to go, we're back on track. Well, wait a minute, we turned off the taps, guys. We can't just drag all these people. We've reassigned them, whatever. And so if this is allowed to drag out and remain question mark for some time, it could have ramifications that can't be quickly reversed.
Well, that was another thing I was going to ask. Like a big company like PCL that's involved, they're a huge company. It has ramifications for them, but they're a big company. They've got other projects. I would imagine most of your membership is smaller sub trades or trades, and
Yes.
that might be their whole thing, right? They might be the whole thing they were working on for the next year. So maybe you could address how this affects the little guy, to use the term.
Well, yeah, I mean, the reality is these things always ripple down through the supply chain. And so if the larger GCs who would be the main contractor on the project are starting to pull back, they will be sending similar signals to their trade partners that would be part of the project. They're big suppliers who, let's face it, in the world of supply chain challenges, a large demand project like this may require early ordering of materials or setting aside certain dedicated deliveries of materials so the supply will be there to meet the volumes. And so the suppliers will be reading the similar signals. And, they may have, this project may have been the only major one they have. It's their anchor project for the next 3 years. Because projects like this isn't like a grocery store that's done in 18 months. This is a 3 to 5 year project providing anchor revenue that could be the hub of your revenue for the next 3 years. And everything else is gravy and add-ons around that. And that security of runway is now in question.
And I guess finally, since they're apparently winding this down or looking at options to do so, where does that leave the line itself? Like, will it function in any form? Or, I mean, they've got to do something to sort of tie this thing in a knot, I would assume.
Well, right now, there's been a significant amount of money spent on enabling works, moving utilities out the way for the proposed alignment that was still in play. The trains themselves have been ordered because they're a long lead time item. And so they're going to show up and they're not compatible with the existing LRT infrastructure because everything was based on a different platform height. So they're going to need, that's an order you can't cancel necessarily. You can maybe delay shipment, but it's probably going to cost you to store them in Europe where they're being made, manufactured and such. So, the reality is, however, in the meantime, Calgary is growing. We are adding housing to meet housing demand. I mean, our housing starts this year are 35% up on the previous year, which was up on the previous year, on the previous year, on the previous year. And so the density and the headcount of population is continuing to grow in these outlying areas. And another another large subdivision was just announced in the last week or so in the southeast. So at the end of the day, the number of people that will not be connected is growing. We need, as a large growing city, you need transit. You need transit to service your people and your population. You need transit to be seen as a global city of worth for investment, for those who may want to locate their headquarters. These are the assets that they do when they're evaluating a city as to whether or not it is a fit for a location of a headquarters, let's just say. And I think that, it's the frustration levels are high. Something that nobody questions we need is in limbo once again. And one would hope that there will be hopefully a wiser head sort of conversation fairly soon. That's have it in a closed room away from the eyes of media and such, so that you don't have to politicize it. And as one of our members, they have a motto in their organization. We need to solve our problems on the basis of what is right rather than who is right. And I would say their motto, so to speak, is very relevant in this setting.
Okay, well, thank you today for joining us today, Bill.
No, thank you for a chance to share our frustrations. It's been a dramatic summer, because we've also had our water main woes to go along with this, and our mayor and city council have had their hands full. So we are definitely somewhat wearied, but we're construction. It's probably one of the most resilient industries out there, and solutions will be found, and we want to be a part of finding the solution and be a part of delivering the solution at the end of the day as well.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Thanks for listening to the Construction Record Podcast. You can hear us on Apple Music, Amazon, and Spotify, as well as at theconstructionrecord.libsyn.com and on the Daily Commercial News and Journal of Commerce websites. Thanks again for listening.